Welcome to Unlocking Human Potential with me, your host, Andy Hosgood, a podcast dedicated to exploring what really takes psychologically, behaviourally and practically to help humans thrive through conversations with leaders, founders, coaches, behavioural experts and people shaping how humans perform and grow. Is this for you? But if you're a leader, a founder, a business owner, an ambitious professional who wants to do more than just perform, they want to grow, inspire, bringing the best out of yourself and the people around you, then the mission is simple: to explore how individuals and teams unlock potential in themselves, in others, and the organisations they shape. Each episode is a deep but relaxed conversation built around three core questions. How do we optimise ourselves? How do we unlock potential in others? And what's the best advice that our guests can give to you, the listener? So now over to this episode. I really hope you find it helpful and insightful. Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm really good, And. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So, welcome again to Unlocking Human Potential with me, Andy Hosgood, and I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Stirrup today. So, for those of you who are unaware of Andrew, then you're in for a treat. So today's guest is somebody who understands people better than most leaders understand their inbox. Andrew Stirrup is a leading leadership consultant, behavioural specialist, and one of those rare humans who talk psychology, emotional intelligence, performance without making it sound like a TED talk gone wrong. Andrew is the founder of AJ Stirrup, his own practice focused on helping leaders build self-awareness, emotional intelligence, behavioural clarity, because it turns out leading humans is easier when you understand how humans work. Andrew works with leaders and organisations who want more than surface level engagement. They want cultures where people actually think, feel and perform better. He calls it the culture factor. It's about developing the right behaviours, mindsets and values for your business to succeed. Andrew is a certified practitioner and trainer in disc flow, using behavioural insights, not to label people, but to help them communicate better and lead smarter. He doesn't work with leadership teams, boards and business owners to help them shape the workplace cultures to drive performance. He also works with other coaches and consultants to help them grow their businesses. What I love about Andrew is this: he's practical, grounded and deeply human. No buzzwords for the sake of it, no leadership theatre, just smart thinking, real experience and genuine curiosity about what helps people thrive at work and beyond. Today we're going to explore how Andrew optimises himself, how he unlocks potential in others, and the advice he believes every leader needs to know right now. So if you care about emotional intelligence as much as strategy and leading like a human, not a job title, then this one is for you.
Nice one.
Let's get going.
Thank you very much.
No,
what
thank
an introduction.
You. Well, I think what's one of the things that connected for me when we first met is what connected us the most. You know, we talked around emotional intelligence, and I think that was it. That was us kind of for about 2 hours, just going deep diving into that. So, you know, for me, when thinking about this podcast, you know, it was like, oh gosh, this would be a fantastic conversation, the conversations we've had. So, you know, it was one of those we have to get this done.
Well,
so,
and it grows arms and legs in all sorts of directions, right? So
100%. So, you know, I think that, you know, the recording of the conversations that we certainly have, I think is going to be really helpful for listeners out there. So just before we get started, as always, I ask our guests something that they're curious about right now. So where does that land?
Oof. Well, I've got a fairly curious mind, right? And I actually think it's something that's really, really important. And I guess we'll probably touch on it later. But I enjoy the news. Okay, so as much as I think that you've got to be careful with the diet that you give yourself, I've always had an interest in current affairs and this sort of stuff. So I'm not massively active on X, for example, but I do now probably use X as one of my biggest forms of news, I guess. I know you've got to be very careful about how you process that and
Yeah.
how you sort of look at it from an educated point of view, I suppose. But I saw something this morning which really sort of piqued my curiosity, because I think it's something that is in everybody's minds, certainly in a lot of parents' minds.
Yeah.
And I'm also relating to a conversation that I had with my son, actually, when I was on holiday. I've been skiing, and we were away a couple of weeks ago in Austria. And he was talking to me about this, obviously this talking about legislation around minors not being able to use social media. And he was really in favour of it. And I was quite surprised by that. He's 20. So I was thinking, well, all right. So we had a bit of a chat about it. And he was saying how detrimental he feels it's been to his generation, if you like, his peer group. And he was saying how they just can't do anything without picking up a phone every 2 minutes and all this sort of stuff. So I saw something on X this morning from the head teacher in London, who you may have heard of, Catherine Birbal Singh, and she basically is a head of a very exciting, quite a prominent school, because it sort of bucks the trend of a lot of other things in education down in I think it's in Brent or Wembley, somewhere like that. And she's basically just commented on some research that's been done around the impact of social on kids, basically,
Right.
on their cognitive power and their ability to perform and everything. And it's like way further reaching than just being like, just a habit, so to speak. But my interest in it is absolutely just because of that habit, right? Because everything that we deal with when we're talking to clients, and we're talking to people individually about their own performance or collective performance, it's all to do with habit. But she was actually saying that in her school, no tech allowed, pretty much. It's like,
Right. Okay.
it's pen and paper, and
Yeah.
and I know from and this is anecdotal now, but a guy who I trained with many moons ago, he always used to say that there was a power in the pen and paper. And he was explaining that when you actually use a pen, it actually effectively, for want of a better phrase, not being a clinician, so to speak, but it sends a light signal to your brain, and it helps create the mental pictures,
Right.
and it causes the thinking when you're doing it. But I just think it's a massive challenge for us. So my curiosity really is, what's the appetite for this from parents? And more importantly, what's the appetite for it from youngsters?
Yeah.
Because, for a 20-year-old lad who's grown up with it, really, he doesn't really, he probably doesn't remember, like you and I. Well, I know I don't. You might. I
Go
mean,
on.
I said to someone the other day, I actually remember, like, I can remember life without,
Yeah.
without mobiles, without
Yeah.
email,
100%. Yeah.
all that
Yeah.
stuff, phone at
Yeah.
the bottom of the stairs and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm because I'm really fascinated by people's general behaviour anyway. But it's more importantly, it's just how um, dangerous that might be. Because think about what this means for the workplace as this generation comes through. Now, I
Yeah.
know I'm not talking about anything here that no one's already started to mention a little bit, but I think
Yeah.
it's going to be even stronger and more powerful, because it's actually not just affecting their attention, it's actually to do with their ability to learn, and their IQ levels are lower and all this stuff. I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's certainly something to be massively aware of, isn't it? Because like you've
Mm.
said, if 20-year-olds are starting to recognize that, and the generation coming up, my daughter's 13, and it is a functional part of being a teenager to make sure that your snap streaks are up to date, or that people communicate by messages on TikTok. There is certainly, which then you've got to interpret that, and it's the interpretation of that. It is, and I think it's a really strong curiosity to lean into, isn't it? On the basis that,
Well, and there's some interesting parallels as well, Andy, because if you think about it, one of the most powerful things that somebody ever said to me. I was unfortunate. I went through quite a challenging divorce many years ago, and at the time, my ex-wife is actually a family lawyer, which meant that it was quite difficult for me, because I almost felt at a little bit of a disadvantage. And I was always, how when you have a situation where you've got a problem or a challenge, and in your life, or whatever you're doing, and you almost try to war game it in your head, and well, if I do that, they'll do this. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
if I say that, they'll say this. And I was in that space, and it was, it was quite hard at the time. It was a long time ago now, 18 years ago. But I was in a tough spot. And my mentor at the time, guy who I trained with called Bob Proctor over in the States, who so you may have heard of Bob, but
Yeah.
sadly he's passed away now. But he once said to me, he said, Andrew, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about you. It's none of your business. And I was like, wow, that sounds a bit arrogant.
Mhm.
And then I really sat back and reflected on it and was like, whoa, actually, no, there's power in that.
Yeah.
I can influence somebody, but I can't actually change the way that they actually think. I can maybe influence it, but I can't control how they think is probably a better way of putting it. Okay.
Yeah.
So coming back to what we were saying before, we're living in a world of instant gratification and very much caring about what other people think. But there's a massive parallel there to how people are in work in all generations. When people are challenged with working with a difficult colleague or a difficult boss, sometimes it's even the boss who's got a difficult team member.
Yeah.
And actually sometimes what's behind that is their own self-talk of what they're saying to themselves of what that might happen. And that's like, so it's all this stuff is really quite interesting. There's lots of different parallels.
Yeah, and we're certainly going to hopefully explore quite a few of them over the next 55 minutes or plus, depends on where this conversation goes.
Yeah.
The just coming back to the few things you said there, I think it's interesting, isn't it, how potential leaders will have to adapt to the generation coming through.
Mhm.
So how do we, as leaders, coaches, help support that generation? Because, like you've said, from conversations certainly I've also had, there are, should we say, leaders or experienced leaders that have been doing it a long time are certainly noticing differences in that,
Mhm.
whatever that means and whatever that goes. I guess that's where the curiosity sits. And something that you said earlier that resonated with me was writing and writing things down. So part of my, I'm a I'm a geek. Let's not mess about with that. And I'm on a constant, always CPD learning journey. And I had to write some reflective practice recently, like you do when you do these postgrad diplomas. Oh, I just write some reflective practice. And when I sat in front of the laptop, I couldn't do it. But once I got my pen out and the
Oh, wow.
paper,
Yeah, there you go.
it flowed so much easier. And actually, to the point where I came away and I was almost gutted I had to do the school run because I was really enjoying it.
Yeah.
And so I think it is, like you've said, that skill of moving away from technology. And, I wasn't aware of the science between writing and creativity, but it definitely, in that example that you gave, me looking at a laptop was like, oh no, I was just
Yeah,
looking at this
yeah.
white screen going, "Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
this is hard
Yeah.
work." Whereas the minute I closed my laptop, got a paper out and just wrote,
Yeah.
then it just flowed and I was completely in the moment, which was
Yeah, which
great.
I mean, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, think about how many sort of self-help or personal development books that people read or that we've read who, they
There's a
recommend journaling, for example. You
bookshelf with
know,
it. Yeah.
well, hello, isn't that part of it?
Yeah. See, I've really
It's not
struggled
just
with.
it's not just brain dumping. It's clearing your head. It's there's a connection to what we're talking about here as well.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful, and it's really interesting. And I know, quite a few people have certainly suggested that as part of a way of helping learning. So that's cool. So getting into this, the podcast, it is kind of broken up into three sections:
Yeah.
exploring yourself. So
Right.
what I'd be curious to lean into is, it might be, and you can take this where you want to go. Is it what have you done to make sure that you're optimal to
Hmm.
be either from a leadership coach perspective, what is it you do to do yourself to turn up? Or we could lean into what is it that you do to help leaders become optimal in their roles? It's part one. Part two is then what do we do then to help unlock the potential in others, which I know you've got a huge passion for, and I really hope we get into deep into that. Selfishly, obviously, because I love listening to that, so I can't wait to hear that. And then we are going to wrap it up. So what I've always found is important if people are going to listen to us for an hour, having a really good conversation and sharing loads of insight, how do we then kind of bring it together so that listeners can take some good stuff away that they can apply immediately? I think we owe listeners, if they're prepared to listen to us, you know,
Hmm.
have a conversation, that how do we wrap that up? Does that
Okay.
sound good?
Yeah, sounds good with me.
So if we start, go on.
Where do you want to start?
I'm just going to start there. If we start with you, if I said, how do you unlock yourself, or how do we make ourselves optimal as leaders? What kind of comes to your head? What?
Well, I mean, there's so many different things that we could touch
Yeah.
on, right? So, we could talk about. I mean, for me right now, is sleep.
Okay.
Okay. Interestingly, so I'm somebody who I've always described myself in recent times as being a light sleeper.
Okay.
Yeah. But actually, it's not that. I think it's because I've had a very busy mind, of a lot going on, and all that sort of stuff. But I also I started to get curious about sort of I heard about taking magnesium, for example, to help you with sleeping, right? And I've tried it, and it is quite remarkable the difference that it's had. Right, it really, really, really surprised me, to be honest. But I've also coupled it with something else. And I'm not, by the way, I am not preachy, and I'm certainly not a puritanical person. Okay, but I've stopped drinking. Now, it's
Yeah.
not the first time I've stopped drinking. Okay, I've done it before. I've done dry January before, and quite a few years ago, I didn't drink for about 9 or 10 months. But the combination of those two things is quite remarkable. But what I've found really interesting is that because I wear a smartwatch,
Yeah.
it's telling me the nature of my sleep now, and I'm having way more deep sleep and way more REM. So I'm waking up more refreshed. I'm actually far more sort of ideas are coming to me more. I'm actually feeling less overwhelmed about certain things. So things that perhaps would have overwhelmed me a bit before, now it's like it just feels a little bit more manageable. And it's just so simple that it's sleep, right? Really interesting.
And I love this topic to start off on because and I'm smiling. So for those that just listening, because I'm a sleep geek. So like you say, track my sleep. I looked at what different. So again, like you, magnesium was something that I started in encouraging. Even how often, what time before I went to bed, what difference it made. So if I did it
Yeah,
30 minutes before, what was the
yeah.
impact on my sleep compared to 60 minutes? And I found like if I take it 60 minutes, actually my sleep was better than I took it 30.
Right. Yeah. Well, I take two tablets. It's called magnesium glycinate, I think it's called,
Yeah.
and I mean we may not be allowed to plug the name of the brand, but it's I
No,
think
you
it's
are.
Nutri Geeks, and it's a very specific type of magnesium.
Yeah.
And I was taking two tablets all in one go just before I went to bed, right? And now I've spaced it out, so about an hour before I take one, and then I take the other one just before I go to sleep.
And
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 it's and
so
it's and it's remarkable the difference.
and I think it's important, isn't it? Because it is such a there is in a lot of, like you've said, in leadership, and I think it's fair to say that there has been a kind of stigma to say that, sayings like you sleep when you're dead, or I don't need sleep, I can work off 4 hours, all of this, and it's almost like a badge of honor to say I don't need to
Yeah,
sleep to
yeah,
run the business.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
actually, one of the things that you're identifying is you're more productive. You feel almost your coping strategies for challenge is better and more productive.
Yeah,
And it's one of the most basic needs of humans
absolutely.
that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And another reason why I've found it interesting is that unfortunately, my father's not been very well in the last 12 months. And as I know, and
mm,
there's been sort of this certain aspect of it where we've been looking at dementia and these sorts of things. And it's just caused me to do more research. And then I've thought about my own health and the impact of like of actually, if you don't have a lot of sleep on a regular basis when you're younger, it actually has a big impact further down the line when you're older, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so taking care of myself more right now is a real focus. I think if I was to simplify it, I would say that there are three things, and it sounds almost too simple. All right, I was at a seminar in near Phoenix in Arizona many years ago, and I was listening to this guy speaking, and he said something, and it just caused me to just sit back and reflect on what he shared, and I was like, actually, you know what? It is actually that simple if you were to chunk it up. And first of all, and this applies to an individual or it applies to a group of people or a team. Okay, you've got to have a clear goal. First of all,
Yeah.
you need to take action. Is the second one, and then you've got to be persistent. And if you do all those three things, now, granted, there's a hell of a lot in each one of those three things, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you look at a successful person, generally speaking, they will have had a very clear idea and a goal of what they want and a burning desire to achieve it. Okay, now sound like I'm sort of parroting Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich here, but you know, if
It's a good book, though, for those
well,
who've not
let's
read it.
face it. Well, ultimately,
Yeah.
I mean, my opinion is that as much as it's old fashioned, it's been had so many different editions over the years. Um, but I've always think you've got to go back to the original, okay, and
Yeah.
just remember the context of when it was written, because
Yeah.
because obviously it's nearly 100 years ago now. But the point being is that when you think about the premise of that book and you read all of the self-help books, they all kind of point back to that. It's
Yeah.
so much of what Hill was talking about was in there. Okay, and he talked about burning desire, and you've got to really, but it's got to float your boat, and it's got to be something that's on purpose. And I think that's something that for me recently, I've actually been challenging my trying to sort of almost reconnect with my own purpose
Yeah.
um, in order to bring that to life again for me, because I kind of was probably losing a little bit of the mojo a wee bit. And then I think the importance of going back and checking that you're stretching yourself and that you have got goals. And it's also not wrong to want to grow and to want other people to grow. But when we look at the action, then it's like now we're into like the really where it gets really deep. Okay, so when I say deep, it's because there's so much to look at.
Mhm.
Because we've all got we've all got habits, and we all have constructive and, or shall we say, creative and non-creative habits.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer that you're either growing or you're dying, so to speak, if you think of it
Okay.
in that way. So unfortunately, a lot of people can have a really clear goal, but they're not taking the right action. And the peculiarity of it, if you think of this in a sort of more of a some might say more of a sort of a spiritual sense, if you think about the world works in a really orderly way, okay, and there's kind of like a rule book, and if we the law will hold you to account. So if you choose to work with that rule book, then things should be, in theory, and will be easier. But if you choose to work against it, then it's going to be harder. And, Emerson said the law of all laws was the law of cause and effect. So if you take negative actions or you do non productive things, which of course will link to your habits and your
Mhm.
habitual way of thinking, all right, then that is going to reduce your chances of success. So actually, it's about not only just taking action; it's about the type of action and the nature of action that you undertake, but also how you think about that at the time, and how,
Mhm.
and how are you relating to that. And then, of course, this is where the third one comes in: is persistence. You know, you probably tell I am a big fan of Hill. He basically said that it's. I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said that there's no heroic connotation to that word. He said basically it is to human performance what carbon is to steel. If you haven't got persistence,
Yeah.
it's like you can't have steel without carbon. You can't have genuine success without persistence. And the problem I think we've got now, come back to what we said earlier, think about the gratification era that the younger generations are experiencing, and this perception of, well, it's just easy, right? Or that, well, because other people make it look easy,
Yeah.
and they don't
Exactly.
appreciate what's
Yeah.
underneath. And then we get into the whole realm of thinking about, well, how does that work? Because, I've got some friends who are successful. There's one guy in particular, a guy who I went to school with, and I would describe him as what you would call an unconscious competent. He's really successful. He's grown a business. He's done loads of really good stuff. But when I say some of these things to him, he just sort of looks at me and goes, "Oh, it's common sense."
Yeah.
But he doesn't know. He almost doesn't know why it's common sense because it's common to him.
Yeah.
But as a professional colleague of mine said to me a while ago, and it really made me chuckle. She said, "Well, the problem with common sense is it's not common."
Well,
You know.
and just on that, I guess leaning into your kind of role as a coach and a kind of supporter of leaders and almost a coach's coach, aren't you really? There's people listening to this because everything you say, I completely align with. And I think the challenge in the world that I'm in, and I'd be curious what, probably in your world, is when we're dealing with leaders, there's that moment of stopping, pausing, and realizing what the habits and behaviors they're in, how they're not helpful, but
Yeah,
there is so much in this
yeah,
habit and behavior of
yeah,
that
yeah.
they can't actually, that saying of can't see the wood for the trees. Does that make sense? Where does that lie with you?
Um, well, I mean, in terms of the general sort of spirit and essence of what you're saying, there, I completely agree with you. Right.
Yeah.
I think there's one of the biggest opportunities for leaders, I mean, it's easy, isn't it? You flip that word, challenge or opportunity. Which way do you want to look at it? Well, let's look at it with a positive slant. Okay. So the opportunity for leaders is, and where, in my experience of the best leaders that I've had the pleasure of working with as clients, or even when I was an employee, is if I really look back at it, other than the fact that they would have, let's say, understanding of their discipline or their sector, or competence in that regard, and strategic thinkers and all that jazz, right? Okay, tick tick tick. But actually, what it was they had a very very good sense of other people. Okay, in other words, they realised it wasn't just all about them. And actually that's quite challenging because, and this is where emotional intelligence comes in, right? So when we think about, you mentioned the disc flow reports that I use, and disc is a concept which basically, for people that are listening here, if they're not aware of it, there's four main personality types. Okay, so we've got dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. The dominance type is somebody who is essentially very much results driven, bottom line, wants to win, success, quite assertive, quite naturally assertive. And they're motivated by being in charge. They want to be in control. Okay. So they're therefore afraid of losing control. Then we've got the influence type, who's very social, outgoing, often quite sort of enthusiastic and optimistic and those sorts of things. I would imagine that you've probably got a fair bit of influence.
I have a high eye, yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Well, so
yeah.
am I, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
but the interesting thing about it is that the influence style is actually it's motivated by social approval, but it's afraid of rejection.
Okay.
Okay. And then we've got the steadiness style, which is really is the steadiness style is they're more what I should say, sorry, is the dominance and the influence style. They're actually more outspoken, faster paced and more outspoken, and they like to get some stuff done quite quickly. And they're not very good at detail, and they can be a little bit more sort of intuitive in terms of how they make decisions. But when we look at the S style basically is very much about harmony. They're motivated by harmony. They're afraid of chaos because they want everyone and everything to be okay. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
And then this compliance style is the one which actually wants to get everything right and is like, very much about dotting the I's, crossing the T's, accuracy,
Right.
empirical, logical thinkers, and all these sorts of things. So I'm trying to remember why I got onto that. Oh, emotional intelligence. So what's interesting is we've all got these behavioral preferences, right? And we're a blend of all four because we've got a score in all four. And actually, sometimes people don't necessarily understand the impact of even a low score. I'm really low in the compliance style, which actually has its strengths and weaknesses in its own right. Most people perceive, well, if it's a low score, that's not very good. Well, no, it means I'm actually a very flexible thinker. I'm quite independently minded. The downside is I can be a bit stubborn sometimes. All right.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but the point is, there's a positive and a negative to a high and a low score for all of them, but we're a mix of all four. So if you think about those four different types of people, all right, they've got think of it, I like to describe it as a mixing desk. So imagine it's a bit like, for those of us that are old enough, a graphic equalizer. You know, in the stereo, we have the little,
I
little
run
bars,
that.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But you think of it like a mixing desk with, you've got an overall sound, but you've got a control level for each one. Okay.
Yeah.
And that determines what that self-talk's like almost in your own head when things happen. So if anyone's thinking, well, what does he mean by self-talk? It's that voice in your head that's just gone, what does he mean by self-talk? It's that voice, okay? And we get a mixture of them. Now, we've all got this natural preference for doing things in a certain way according to our style. But what's really interesting is that we also have this thing called emotional intelligence, all right? Now, people say to me, well, what do you mean by that from the perspective of DISC? And what we're really saying is that how people turn up with those behavioral preferences, that's really their emotional intelligence. Okay. So, in other words, those strengths and limitations, the more emotionally intelligent somebody is, then generally speaking, what you'll find is that they're able to play to the strengths of those DISC preferences. Okay. More. And it's almost like they can mitigate it when the limitations are coming out, because their emotional intelligence and awareness enables them to, it's a bit like a handbrake almost. They're able to pull the handbrake on a little bit. Now, the reverse is true. So if you're lower on emotional intelligence, okay, then that awareness is less. And it means that the limitations of the style, so for example, if someone was a highly dominant character in terms of the DISC score, then their real strength is getting results, driving things, making sure, how can we do it, when we're going to get it done, all that, all positive. The drawback is they might be overbearing. Yeah. They might overpower other people. They might be overly assertive. They might just get on with it themselves. Yeah, okay. So, and that characterization applies for all the styles in different ways. Yeah. So back to the original point. So when we think about emotional intelligence now, you were coming at it from a point of view of what can leaders do. Okay, sort of almost what's that moment of reality check, and I completely agree with you. But it's about actually the thing that we grow and develop as a leader is actually our emotional intelligence. Okay, that's the thing that is developmental. So if you're a leader and you're working, there's more than one aspect to emotional intelligence. Okay, so the DISC flow model doesn't look at all of them, but it looks at the two main ones, the two cornerstones, which is self-awareness and awareness of others. Yeah. All right. Now, if we think about how you were characterizing it before, what we're really saying is that the awareness of others is important. In other words, they're almost like subsets of it. So it's the person's ability to identify other people's thoughts and feelings. Yeah. It's their ability to show and have empathy. It's their ability to actually almost understand and acknowledge and value the differences that are appearing between people. Okay, it's huge. And then you've got what's you could call social intuition, which is to do with really your intuition is. I mean, I'd love to talk about that in a bit, because that's an amazing topic to discuss. I think it's one that most people don't particularly understand. Yeah. But all these things are the things that, in my experience, great leaders have worked on and developed, but they understand something that's so important. It's a never-ending journey. Right? You said earlier that you're like, you described yourself as a geek, and you're on this permanent CPD sort of. Sounded like it was like a hamster wheel, but but the point
feels like it sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you got yourself to blame for that. Yeah, but it's a good thing, isn't it? Because you understand the benefit of doing that, right? Mm-hmm. So I did something recently. I'm working with a coach at the moment, and he asked me to complete a life wheel. Okay, and so this is him helping me. And I was looking at, and I don't know how familiar you are with them. They're a variety of different flavors of this, but in essence, some of them have 5 categories, some have 6, some have 10, but you score yourself and you rate yourself in the different areas of your life. Yeah. So you're asking around. Normally, it's around things like your surroundings, or your home and environment would be one. Your significant other, for example, health. like fun and leisure, all these different things. And one of them is money and career. Okay, and then another one is personal development.
Yeah.
So I rated myself when I was doing this, and I was like, wow, it's really, really interesting because my money score is all right. It could be better, if I'm honest. All right, but that's directly linked to my career score. All right, so hello, let's go back to the gaps thing. My goal's not good enough. It's not big enough. It's not. I'm not testing myself. I'm not stretching myself enough. Right.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting was that my personal development score was lower than it used to be. Right.
Right.
Now that's me being quite vulnerable here on this call, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When you think about what I do, because there's a danger. Even you and I, we think we get to a point where you just think, oh, I don't need to bother anymore. Almost, it's like it's okay, but no. So it's that connection between that thing. So constantly learning. Well, emotional intelligence is just the same. All right, it's a never-ending journey. You can't. People who are emotionally intelligent and great leaders know that, and they keep working on it.
Listen, I love this, and one of the things that I guess the few things I've picked up, if we can just play some of it back, the few things I picked up was one, how the importance of doing, I know your superpower is your disc flow, and one of the things that there are others out there, but I know, I've done disc and it's been really helpful to me, and I think what's interesting with that is it raises your self-awareness, doesn't it? So, and I think, like you've said, if you use it as a tool to say, okay, rather than a tool to beat yourself up with, to say, well, actually, I'm no good at that, so therefore I'm rubbish at that, and I have to behave like this because of my high D, rather than going, like you've said, lean into it to say, well, actually, I know what my strengths are, and I've got the emotional intelligence to realize that when I need to be good with that, but sometimes when it can be overpowering, I think is a real skill, isn't it? Because that,
Yeah.
if you are a dominant character naturally, and that is your natural, you're naturally a high D, and you come across people that might feel overwhelming, then actually you're not going to be as productive or effective. But so learning when to kind of almost dial it down a level or not can be really effective. Is
Well,
that fair?
sometimes, and what's really interesting. Sometimes it's not about dialing it down.
Right.
It's actually just about how it's positioned or
Okay.
how it's said, or listening more and then asking the pertinent question, which is just as powerful, right? It can be
Yeah.
all sorts of different things,
Yeah.
but I mean, self awareness is an interesting sort of thing to think about because. I mean, as I said earlier, right, this gets arms and legs and goes all over the place when we think
Yeah.
about psychology of performance. So you said before, people might see themselves, they're a D, they see themselves as a D. Well, I'm a great believer that, you know, we um, we have a picture of ourselves that controls our ability to do. Okay, now, and that is, it's not just one picture; it's hundreds of thousands of them, probably, if we're really
Yeah.
honest. All right, so if you think about somebody who play. In the past, I've worked with professional footballers, and and I've asked them the question. The player I'm thinking of now, I'm naturally right-footed. Very good with his left foot as well. He's a professional footballer, right? But if I said to him, "Which is your best foot?"
Yeah.
and if you're having to step up and take an 89th minute free kick, which one are you going to use? I'll use my right one. Well, why did you pick that one? Well, because it's my better one. That's interesting. So, in other words, you've got a picture of yourself of how good you are with your left foot and your right foot, and they're different. Now, that's an easy example here for me to use to convey
Yeah.
principle. But if we think about that, we all have a picture of ourselves about every single thing that we do, what we can and we cannot do, what we like to do, what we don't like to do. And that picture is the thing that is like the thermostat that determines our level. And we have to learn to change that picture. Okay. So the challenge is that sometimes people's self-awareness of themselves is either the picture they hold is the wrong one, all right, and they're allowing that to dominate, okay. I can think of another player that I work with, and one his goal with me one of them was that he said he wanted to score from a corner with his head, right? This is quite
Right,
interesting,
okay.
right? Okay, this guy's a centre half, okay, and it's not like he hadn't done it before, but he got a belief now that he couldn't.
Okay.
So we had to deal with that, right? So he had a picture of himself as somebody who couldn't, but we got him to see it the way that he wanted it to be, and it was. I remember being there when he actually finally did score, and it was
Oh,
like,
brilliant.
it was amazing, it was awesome, okay. But we've got to. The point being is we have to be able to, when we think about self awareness, there's sort of, broadly speaking, four areas, right? We've got self reflection. We have to be honest with ourselves. So when we reflect on our ability or what's happened or an interaction with other people or what went well and what didn't go well in a meeting or this sort of stuff, we've got to put ourselves in a position, us, but almost imagine that we're an independent observer,
Yeah.
observing us, but being brutally honest and truthful. So that's one thing. Now, we talked about self-belief before because that kind of, really the picture you hold of yourself is the beliefs you've got about yourself, all right? That's another thing that you have to be aware of and learn to change. But also it's about, emotional clarity. It's what's the impact of a situation? How does that, you sort of alluded before to the leader that gets triggered, all right? Well, what triggers us? What emotions does that cause in us? Because of how we think about something determines how we feel, and that determines how we behave. Well, it also works the other way around because when, let's say the other way around, something happens, we have a negative feeling or reaction to it, or we're cross or we're angry or whatever. Okay, that's because we've not hit the pause button and gone stop and think.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so the feet that's just in charge. That thing's in charge. So, and all of that's driven through self awareness, and sometimes it's reflection. It's developing it is about being able to do it in the heat of the moment, right?
Yeah.
But it's also very much learning that skill comes from doing it after the event and going, what happened there? Next time, I'm not going to do that. Okay. And it's being open to feedback. That's the other thing about, a huge part of emotional intelligence is seeking feedback from other people and being brave enough to do it.
Yeah. There's two things. If we could just lean into that, and then I'd love to kind of explore how we use this to help unlock others as well, if from a leadership perspective. So there's two things. One, feedback. It again made me smile because it's, and you said that being brave enough to do it, and I think that is, if you, it's how we see feedback, isn't it? And I think a lot of us can, and I'll talk from a personal perspective, sometimes we take that as we've done something wrong and someone's telling us off or something. Whereas actually, if we can find the positive intention from feedback, as in, okay, so it's naive to think we know everything, we get everything right, and we behave optimally all the time. So if somebody can shine some light on something that we could do better, that is, but they say it with love and compassion, and it's going to be helpful for us move it across. Even if someone doesn't say with love and compassion, but we can go, actually, there might be something helpful in that I can do something about,
Yeah.
and we see it as a positive. I've actually had that conversation today, which is why I was smiling, because I thought the fact that you brought it up in the way you brought it up was good. So if there's anything else on that, that would be,
Well, I think just as a little, whilst
yeah,
because of what you've just said there, just to sort of to expand on it a little bit and go back to what I was saying before. So I'm not saying that this is like a boilerplate rule that I'm giving you now that this applies to everybody. Okay, and we're all at different stages in our journey. We're all different people. We've all got different life experiences. And that's something that's really, really, really important. This is, it's kind of think of like an iceberg. It's what's going on under the surface. We've got all sorts of different things that influence our personality and who we are, and one thing and another. If you think about what you just said there, go back to what I was saying about the different disc styles. So if you find that somebody gets tricked, let's imagine that scenario that you shared. The person who's more dominant, if they were receiving feedback that was unwelcome, or look, no, let me rephrase that, was honest
yeah,
and truthful, let's call it that, truthful and honest, then in some cases, with some people of the high dominance side, they would feel like that was them losing control.
Mhm.
Okay. Back to this, what I said earlier. All right. Really interesting. So imagine if it was someone who's the high I. What did we say about them? They're about social approval and rejection. Well, for them, they're thinking, oh no, they don't like me. I feel rejected. And I need to feel liked to feel almost in inverted commas important. Yeah. If you've not got a lot of I, by the way, it sounds a bit weird, but people are oxygen to people with the I style. You know,
Yeah.
it's they without people contact, they feel like they're being starved or something. And then the S style, they might be thinking, oh, I just got that feedback and oof, have I offended them?
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. What have I done wrong? All right. When it's just honest feedback.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the C style, who's motivated to get it right and is afraid of getting it wrong, they could get the feedback and they take it as like criticism. You don't trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is where but if you're more emotionally intelligent, or as you develop the emotional intelligence, and you have an understanding of, well, that's kind of like my program and how I operate, and it's okay for someone of my style to be like that, but I need to manage that.
Yeah.
And it's about creating that awareness.
Yeah, because the other point I was going to bring, and so I'm glad you've kind of gone down that tangent, was the fact of the negative self-talk that
Mm-hmm.
people, so being self-aware is great and having that self-reflection. For some, um, and again, it's an experience-led thing, and I guess I'd love to explore your thoughts on it, is going, for some, that self-reflection can actually really spark their inner critic, can't it?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, where does, so, and I want to explore how people could improve their emotional intelligence as well. But I guess with that, then let's say somebody listening to this realizes that going, actually, I'm a really good self-reflector, but actually when I self-reflect,
Doesn't help.
that internal voice actually goes, woohoo, you've just put fuel in my fire, you're getting it now.
Yeah, yeah.
So what could people be potentially? Where does that land with you? What could people be doing with that?
Well, I sort of I have again, I've got loads of thoughts on this, but there's one
Yeah,
little concept which I think might be useful for people that are listening that they
awesome.
might find helpful. So I call it your imagi memory. Okay,
Okay. Yeah.
so we've got these creative faculties at play, which are our ability to almost challenge what we think. All right, so we've got reasoning is our ability to think. All right, but then we've also got our imagination and our memory, and we've got our will, which is our ability to focus on things and all that sort of stuff. And we've also got our intuition, which we can develop. But the long and the short of it is our imagination and our memory have a very, very interesting relationship. Okay. And the other one, which we've got to remember, is perception. So, perception is your point of view. And depending upon how you choose to look at something, that is the thing that is determining how you're thinking about it. So we have to learn to be almost more critical thinking, but not criticizing ourselves, trying to look at things independent of circumstances when we're unpicking it, and just being okay with where we are for now. It might not be what we want, but it is what it is almost.
Yeah.
But how do we want it to be? So then, what does this really mean? So we think about perception. I say to people normally, right? Okay, if something happens, this is a little golden rule. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's bloody helpful. Okay, and that is if you've got a situation you don't like, or you're not, or something's not gone how you want it to go, say this to yourself: what's the opposite of that? Simple as that. Okay, because everything's got a natural opposite. And if you go, what's the opposite of that? And then ask yourself, but if I was to do that and focus on that and commit to that, would that make a difference or would I get a different outcome? You'll probably find 80% plus of the time, you're going to get a positive answer to that question to yourself. All
Yeah.
right. And then what you got to do is go, well, what are my habits that are stopping me from doing it?
Yeah.
And changing and then thinking about it and so on. Now then, that's one aspect. However, if I said to you, and I suspect that you'll probably know this instinctively, but you are you more likely, or is a person more likely to remember a positive, like a good experience, a good memory, or a negative experience, a negative memory? Which one would you be more? Which one do you think is more powerful?
I can give an example. When I was trying to reflect back on stuff, I couldn't remember any of the things I'd done well. I could remember very, very
Okay,
vividly and clearly all the things I
perfect. All
didn't
right.
do
So the
well.
point.
Yeah,
All right, brilliant. So now, having said that, if I asked you, well, think of a time where you've had a really, really positive experience and a positive memory,
I could do it.
you'll get one, right? You'll find one, all right? It might not come as quickly, but you will.
Yeah.
And if you unpick it, the probability is that it will be that positive memory will be emotionally charged. It will have been a big deal,
Oh
like
yeah.
passing your driving test, or getting your degree, or I don't know, getting married, or something big, right? Because there's a lot of emotion attached to it. Okay. Now, what's interesting is that the negative emotions, the negative memories also have a lot of emotion attached to them, but
Yeah.
it's inherently negatively charged, right? So what happens is, unfortunately, sometimes we have an experience, or we go, "Oh, here we go, it's happening again,"
Yeah.
because that's how it was before. But we're listening to a memory which was in the past,
Yeah.
right? And a bit like the hourglass with the sand pouring through it. It's the sand in the bottom is what's gone before. You can't do anything about it. You've just got to live life at the neck, and you don't know how much sand you've got above you. Okay, so
Yeah.
we think of it like that now. Now combine that with your imagination. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, back to good old Mr. Napoleon Hill again, right? He said your imagination is the most marvelous, miraculous, and inconceivably powerful force that the world's ever known, right? Because everything in your room right now, even how you've set out your bookshelf and your microphone and all that stuff, right, is through the use of your own imagination.
Yeah.
Okay, so now our imagination, we can use it to we can use it for good juju or bad juju.
Yeah.
Because if we use it in the wrong way, and here's what's interesting, if we get the negative memory and then we use our imagination in a negative way with that memory, we're bringing the two together, and it's not good. Because then we're starting to live this self-fulfilling prophecy, but we're enabling our imagination to make it even more powerful,
Yeah.
and we're emotionalizing it more. So actually, what we've got to be able to do is to learn, is ask ourselves, well, hang on a minute, why am I thinking like that?
Yeah.
What is it that causes me to? What's happened to me before that was like that? Well, hang on. Well, what did I learn, and what was the opposite of that? And then there's a way for you to sort of to almost to triangulate this a little bit. And here's a massive one, and so many people share this, Andy. It's common sense, but it comes back to what I said earlier, actually, in many respects, about what other people, doesn't matter what other people say about me, it's none of my business. But um, not challenging the information that comes in from outside, from other people, what they say.
Oh, and just taking it in as gospel. So if someone
There you
says
go.
something to you, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You're 100%. I'll give you an example. I tell this all the time. I wasn't particularly great at science and maths at school. Okay. It wasn't my natural bent, if I'm honest. But did I, with the benefit of hindsight now, looking back, did I underperform? Yeah, I did. All right. I did. And here's one of the main reasons. Because I can remember sitting at the dinner table with my parents and my brother. And I remember my brother talking about being challenged by similar things. And I remember my dad saying to my brother, "Don't worry about it. Stirrups have never been any good at science." And I went, inside, "Get in. There's my
Finishing.
get out of jail free card."
Yeah. That,
Right?
that, yeah.
Check out, Andrew. You're all right now. Right?
Yeah. I know.
So, but it wasn't true. It genuinely wasn't true. But I chose to, that his false belief, because it was, to be fair, I love him to bits, love him dearly, but it was a false belief, really, that he was inputting on me. But I just let it in. I didn't challenge it in my head. And
And,
I was young, right? But
yeah.
you see the point.
100% the point. And I think from that thing, your dad's done it with love, so your brother didn't feel bad about himself. But actually, the consequence of that is, like you've said, it give you get out of jail free card and went, right, I don't have to bother in science because we're crap at science.
Yeah, and I think of this. Imagine this in the workplace, right? So imagine say two team members, and the boss is talking to one team member and has a similar-ish conversation about something else. But the other team member hears it and goes, "Oh, all right then. Well, that's fine then. Okay." So now we get into the realms of, you said, how do you bring it out in others? Well, you think about teams. Accountability is really important. The standards, and my biggest passion of all really is values. You know, I believe that your behaviours are a living expression of your values, and great leaders. Here's another interesting one. He said, how can leaders play around with this, and how can they use it? I think it's not misunderstood. It's underestimated. And those that are more aware, when you say it to them, go, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So at a personal level, where do our values sit? What are they there for? Okay. And the truth is that I've come to realize that your values are the things that you turn to when you've run out of all the other answers. It's almost like, I don't know what to do. So what is it that informs you? Well, it's your values. And what's very interesting is that quite a lot of, when working with teams, it's quite interesting that when you ask people to try and identify what the values are, believe it or not, they find it quite hard.
Well, it's interesting because listening to you, I was going to ask you to go. I know that this comes up in a lot of the self-help business books, doesn't it? You've got to understand your values. So can you share for those that are probably sitting here going, yeah, I struggle with that.
Yeah.
Is there any insight?
Do you mean from a company and team perspective, or do you mean from an individual
I
perspective?
think from a both perspective, I think what'd be interesting is if there's someone listening to this going, you know, I struggle with understanding my values too, because I've done lots of different values exercises, and I'll be honest, every time I've done it, I've been guided, and I
Uh-huh.
found the guidedness actually help it come out of myself. I think if I was left in a room to go with a whiteboard and said,
Yeah.
what are my
Okay. Yeah. I
values?
get you. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Fine.
what
Yeah.
we do with those to then maybe how does that then create the behaviors and the culture within an organization? And then
Mhm.
how does that align with the values of everybody else? Is that
Okay.
big
Yeah.
topic?
Absolutely.
Big
Yeah.
topic, I appreciate it.
Well, let's deal with it as the individual, and
Yeah,
then we'll go to the team. So, an
quality.
individual basis, and it's kind of like this principle underpins both, and that is, in simple terms, it's like, who am I and what do I stand for? What's non-negotiable for me?
Okay.
And by that, it's about standards, about how you wish to conduct your life and how you wish to be treated by other people. What you will and you will not accept is one way of thinking of it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, people say to me, well, what are your values? Now, it just so happens that if you look at my organizational values, they are my values because it's me. So,
Yeah.
kind of, it's the same thing. But, and rather spookily, it wasn't intentional. It spells the word trust. Okay. Because I actually believe that trust, by the way, is fundamental. It's at the heart of everything, that every great relationship that there is, commercial, romantic, business, leader to boss, friend to friend, you name it. Trust is at the heart of it. Another podcast for you there. That's a massive topic.
Part two. Yeah, I
Part
like it.
two, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk about that. But if you now come back to where I was going with this, is that it's about what's not it's what's not it's non-negotiable, but it's about who you are. It's like your DNA. If you to cut him in half, what you like, what's she like? It's kind of, so for me, my first value is about, I basically say, it's about speaking the truth, right? And I can characterize that in lots of different ways, but it's about speaking the truth. And then it's about being real. That's my second one. That's about being authentic. It's wearing my heart on my sleeve. You know, it's not varnished. It's just the way it is. I am what I am, and I'm not embarrassed by that, so to speak. But it's about being authentic and having integrity as well. And it's about, and I admire that in other people as much as I believe that's a standard I have for myself. Okay.
Mm.
Then it's about my other one is actually seeking to understand, which is so important. If you think about so many of the things we've been talking about during this conversation, it's actually about seeking to understand and looking at it from a position of the truth again. All right. And then finally, it's very much about thinking differently. It's about changing those perspectives and learning to challenge what's in front of you. So that's kind of what I use when I don't really know where I'm at. Okay.
Nice.
But it's
Yeah.
also about, but it's more than that. It's about the respect. You know, I don't want to be I don't want to be deal with people that lie to me on a consistent basis. No, It's like, no, I'm not doing that. Sorry. So how people do it, what you both just, I would say, it's like, who are you and what do you stand for?
Mm.
What's important to you in that sense? And think about it in how you wish to be treated and how you treat other people. And that's a really good start point. Because when you look at organizational values, so to come to the team perspective, I said before that your behaviors are a living expression of your values. The opportunity for leaders in businesses is that unfortunately many businesses do values and they do them as a tick box exercise and they stick them on the wall. It's just wall paint.
Yeah.
Right, and it's like bloody hell. And actually the other great danger, and I mean the number of times that this happens is it's incredible, is that you go to an organization, you speak to them about their values, and then they say, yeah, we've got some values. And then you say, well, what are they? And well, number one, they can't tell you. So that tells you straight away. They don't know, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So what chance have the leaders got of telling the rest of the business?
yeah,
Or should I say, getting them on board with those values? And then, but more importantly, then you find out, well, how did you ask that killer question? How did you create them? How did you establish them in the first place? I just made them up, or we did them as a board, right? Well, you're not going to get engagement from your people. You've got to
yeah,
listen to them. You've got to involve them in that process so that you're creating and capturing that if you like, the persona or the DNA of the business. And the place you start really before you get to that point is actually saying, who are we and what do we stand for? What's our purpose? And then if you identify what the purpose is, you say, well, how do we need to show up on a daily basis and what's important to us? And the really, really important thing is that it's the best place to start, Andy, is it's an external perspective, not
okay,
an internal one. So what I mean by that is think of it from your customer's perspective
yeah,
and look at it from that point of view first. Okay, your customer or your client or your patient or whatever it might be. Okay, and then actually what you do is you look at that and then you do it on an internal perspective. And it's like, it's not always, but very often it's a bit of a drop the mic moment when I run sessions for people, because people just go, oh blimey, it's the same. Oh hello, isn't that interesting?
yeah, yeah,
But you've got to start thinking about the other person, think about the customer. Okay, so but the reason why it's useful and important ultimately is the other thing to say here is it's got to be something which is shareable. It's a soundbite for mass consumption, something that you can share as part of your daily parlance. But it also needs to, it needs to have a descriptor underneath so people can actually understand what it means. But the behaviours themselves are right. Okay, then. So let's go and ask our people and our teams, how do we want to be treated, and how should we behave in relation to this value? Then, how would that turn up on a daily basis? And you'll get the feedback. Well, that's not going to happen. From some people say, no, that's not the question I'm asking you. How do you
mm.
want it to be? And then you create that, and then you have something to provide a vision for, to inspire people to want, and very importantly, to hold them to account for. And it's not just the employees and the team members; it's all the way across the business. It's leader to leader, it's senior leader to lead. It's board members to board members. It's anyone in the business, in theory, should be able to hold anybody to account for the values. Now, if anyone's listening to this and they go, "That sounds really scary," yeah, why? Because it requires the leaders to be vulnerable in the first place.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's not a loss of control. It's really powerful if you do it properly.
Uh, and I think no, I'm 100% on board. And I guess what I would love from listeners on this, it would be, if there is where this has resonated, I'd be curious the feedback where they've landed with it, because I'm sure there's some real examples of people listening to this going, "Oh, we've tried them exercises," or that's not landed well and stuff. Because I think, like, one of the things is, and what made me smile, and you actually, when we one of the talking points that we had down was talked about values versus live values. And it is that, isn't it? It's that, sometimes I have been aware of businesses that have said, what is the values that we think people want us to have? And
Yeah,
what we're going to do is we're going to
yeah,
put them on the wall. But
yeah,
actually, when you look at the internal behaviors of the organization, they're not actually aligned. So the ones on the wall is the ones that they're the ones on the wall, so people think that's what we should do, but actually the ones that are actually driven. And that is that disconnect that I've always found is the where the kind of the issues within the
Yeah,
organizations have
you're
come
right,
from.
and there's also an extension to that in some respects, or a slightly different angle. So um, quite often, I'm asked to go into businesses to almost the phrase I use is pressure test the values that they've already got, right? And it's often because when I'm having that initial sort of, if you like, consultative sort of diagnostic conversation at the beginning of the engagement, you kind of know in our sort of role, you kind of know what to look for, right? And sometimes you think, no, this is quite obvious to me,
Mhm.
but you end up it's what they often don't realise, and then there's a big light bulb moment when we're talking about it. Is I say to people, look, the way in which you go about doing this is about you. It's your first step to show that you're doing something differently. The key bit is follow through, right? However, it's actually saying to the team, look, we're saying that our culture and our environment and how you feel about working here is important to us. So that's really, really important. When they're doing it, though, it's actually quite often what you find is that it kind of grows, and they go, oh right, yes, yeah, no, it's not really changed. It's just how it's been articulated. And it's because all of a sudden we've got them involved.
Mm,
It's really, really big, right?
mm,
But it provides the a language, and if you do it well, a bit like disc. One of the reasons why disc is useful is because it becomes like a common parlance. Well, that's how values, when they are embedded well within an organisation, um, are used in all sorts of ways, and can even be used in marketing and all sorts of things. But it's ultimately the behaviour is the living expression of that value, and it's either onside or offside. And guess what? That's then where the leadership challenge lives.
can
How do
I
we deal
just
with that, right? In
well,
inverted commas.
it's interesting because what came up for me, and I'll share it to see where it lands with you, and then we we'll see if we can try and wrap up a little bit. So one of the things I heard there was this, and I love all this, and there's definitely I've got 8 million questions I want to ask, but I'm going to try and keep it to one. So people listening, some will resonate with that. Some probably haven't done a values exercise, and my assumption for people listening, going, if I do that, it means we're going to have to change stuff within the business, and whatever there's. And again, it's an assumption, but based on probably quite a lot of experience, then when we use the word change, there's normally the eyeballs get a bit bigger, and they sit back on the seat and they go, oh no. Because so when we talk around change and behavioral change within organizations, I've picked a big question here, I appreciate it.
Go on then.
We're just curious then, from your experience, is there any insights that would be helpful for listeners at this moment who are probably in that, and what's kind of running through my head with complete clarity for you and for the listeners that, I'm working with two organizations that probably going to go through what quite a significant change this year. And I know the underpinning of that, every time I try and bring that into the forefront of conversation, they will do everything in the world to change that topic and conversation on the basis going, I know this is going to be a big deal. And so therefore there is a little bit of a nudge to do it. So I'm just curious, where does that land?
Uh, well, that's in a different box.
Okay.
Um, so that when you said earlier about the culture factor, this is this is now you've got mindset, behaviors, and values, right? So this is now mindset slash behaviors, more mindset. So and I know we're running out of time, so it's a deeper conversation. But in a nutshell, coming back to what we were saying earlier about habitual behavior, change is inevitable. All right. and we either develop and change and grow and move with the times, or we don't. But if we stand still, we're going to be going backwards in the end, right? So that's a harsh reality of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take that as a given. But the reason why people almost contend with the proposition of what you're suggesting to them is because you're really unsettling the existing predetermined habits and essentially if you like the way it's always been around here, because that's comfortable.
Yeah.
Right. And you're suggesting doing it differently. And what it's doing is it's actually challenging people to have to do things differently, get out of their comfort zone, observe people differently, behave differently, accept feedback. There's a whole manner of things. Well, we're kind of like programmed to just do what's easy, the easiest, all right, least path of least resistance almost.
Yeah.
And where the person that is so I mentioned earlier about sort of conscious incompetence and being able to do something without really thinking about it and not really knowing why. Those kinds of people, if they're wired the right way, will just go, oh, we need to get on with it.
Yeah.
Okay. But equally, with some people, actually what it's about is about us actually equipping them to understand that there's a reason why it's uncomfortable, but that's okay. All right. Let's focus on what we want and how we want it to be. Let's not be limited or controlled by the past. Doesn't mean ignore the past, but it means let's not allow that to control and limit what we can possibly do or achieve in the future. And it ultimately it's a mindset thing, and it is absolutely to do with the way in which our subconscious mind works, because our subconscious mind is where all these limiting beliefs, habits, pictures that we hold of ourselves, live. So in one example, you might be talking to a team and asking them to do something, Andy, and the picture they're now getting in their head is shit, that means we're all going to have to talk to each other more and maybe disagree more. That feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right? Well, yeah, that's because you never have. Well, guess what? Because you haven't been, you've not been getting the results that you deserve.
And it's interesting.
Want. It deserves different. They probably do deserve the poor results, but
but it's interesting because and align with that. I use the terminologies familiar and unfamiliar. So it's at the moment they're very familiar. So it's almost like and both these examples, actually, the need to change has come from them. And it's me holding them to account to say, I thought you said you wanted to change.
So it's absolutely. So it's like there's always a difference between what we know we should do and what we actually do.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me rephrase that. For those that are stuck, there is normally a difference between what they know they should be doing and what they're actually doing. There's a guy many, many, many years ago, a guy called Albert Ian Gray. I think this was in the 1930s. And he wrote an essay called "The Common Denominator of Success," and he said that the common denominator of success, he described it as, he said, successful people form the habit of doing things that failures do not like to do. Successful people form the habit of doing things that failures do not like to do. In other words, the people who don't get on allow the pre-existing easy life, comfy life, let's sit on my mobile phone and do that all day and not go and make sales calls or whatever it might be, right? That's easier, so that's what we will. Yeah, well, that's because you're forming the habit of doing the thing that the failure wants to do there, right? Is just muck about. Whereas the person who's successful goes, no, that's not a productive habit. I need to change that habit.
Yeah.
Even though I don't want to do it, I recognize I have to do it to succeed.
And it's interesting that for me, what's coming up from that is the saying of, I will do that despite of. So even if you've got fear, anxiety, or whatever that emotion they attach to change, I'm prepared to do this despite of me feeling anxious or uncertain or unsure. And
and some of that comes back to getting re-engaged with the goal, right, and having a burning desire. And I mean, ultimately, what you're dealing with here is when you think about team performance. So if anyone's listening who is maybe a solopreneur, or if someone's got a team of people, the principle is the same, and here's why. Because a team, if you define it in strictest sense, is two or more people working together towards a collective goal, right?
Yeah.
So but a team is made up of the individuals. So you end up with, you've got this individual baggage, if you like, if you're one person, which are all the things that get in your way. Okay. And we've all got that for ourselves within the team. But what's really interesting and again, we mentioned this earlier about letting other beliefs in and all this sort of stuff, is that we actually end up with groupthink and we end up with group habit. But you can only influence groupthink and group habit by changing. You have to know how it's formed in the first place. All right. And it's to do with the fact that it's all to do with how your conscious mind and your subconscious mind works. All right. Your subconscious mind can't reject. If you tell yourself you can or you can't do something, it'll believe it. Yeah. So it's a very powerful concept, but it can't reject. So we've got to be really careful what we say to ourselves and what we say to each other, because it'll take it. And that's the bit that causes us to behave the way we do without thinking, right? That's a powerful concept. But what's even more powerful is it can't tell the difference between what is real or imagined. So it must accept, and it can't tell the difference between what's real or imagined. So if you, this is why having a clear goal and believing in that goal and emotionalizing that goal and holding that picture on the screen in your mind, it's kind of like, somebody says, that fake it till you make it. Well, yeah, it kind of is what's happening with fake it till you make it. You're actually convincing yourself because your subconscious must accept it. Very powerful, right? But it happens on a team basis as much as individual. Group think, group habit, right?
I think it's a really powerful, and I think it's probably the point where we're going to pause.
Sure.
Just on the basis being is, I think that's a brilliant place to kind of pause for listeners to kind of stop and reflect on that, of going, what is it you're telling yourself? Because whatever you're telling yourself, as I understood what you've just said, right? So correct me if I've if I'm going to mess this up. Is that our subconscious cannot tell the difference of if or cannot has to believe what we're telling it. So if we then choose to tell it what is most helpful to get us from whatever we're trying to do A to B, then that's going to be helpful. So if you is the question then, is what you're telling yourself helpful, yes or no? And if not,
Right.
then you need to start having a different conversation with yourself.
Correct. Because yes, and very importantly and critically, okay, it works. It's totally deductive. It must accept, and in other words, if you tell yourself all the reasons why you can't or why it all went wrong before and believing it's still going to go wrong, it will just. That's why it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, the great quote from Henry Ford, right? If you think you can, you think you can't, you probably will be right.
Yeah,
That's what it means.
No, I love that. I love that. So just to start wrapping up,
Mm-hmm.
again, I could talk all day about this, and I would love a part two. Is there any topics that we haven't really covered that you feel would be helpful to the listeners?
Uh, well, I don't know. I'm probably a bit like you, Andy.
Once we get going, we get
yeah,
going.
it just comes out, right? I've not really got any. I didn't bring any agenda to the call, so to speak.
No, that's
I
good.
think if I'm thinking about, it's kind of a little bit of the last bit is so important. But if I try and go back to some of the things we talked about earlier, I think there's three sort of little tips that I would give people,
Awesome.
which are really, really simple. They're really basic. Okay. There's nothing like sort of particularly like sort of rocket science about this. But it's incredibly powerful. And the first one is, well, before I begin, the three things apply to you for yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. But also thinking about other people and your interactions with other people as well, and observing other people. Okay. So what what I always say to people is that there's a real power in think about everything we said about emotional intelligence and self-reflection and all that stuff, right? And review and the importance of that. Have that in the back of your mind, but ask yourself this, right? When you speak to people, here's the first point, first tip. when you're talking to people, are you genuinely listening to what they are saying to you? Or are you listening for what you think they're going to say? Or, in other words, are you perhaps projecting your opinion or belief onto what they're saying and allowing that to essentially to affect the real truth of what that person is saying? Okay. Now, when I said that's very much thinking of, like, say, me talking to you or a listener talking to somebody else. Now, just think of yourself as your own best friend, right?
Yeah.
You know, which bit of you are you listening to? Or are you listening, are you listening to genuinely what the issues are and what you want? Or are you listening for all the negative self-talk that's just been there before? Which one is it? Could be careful which one you dial into and learn to unpick it, okay? The other thing is to remember, and we've touched on this in a number of ways, is that as humans, and there's a real connection here to selling, actually, believe it or not. Because if you're going to be successful, you've got to learn to sell yourself almost, because of the things we've been talking about at the end. But inherently, think back to the way in which I was characterizing the disc styles, for example, we are essentially programmed to move towards things that we want and away from things that we do not want. Okay, so we'll be motivated. So, for example, someone who's a high I might not like having a difficult conversation with somebody and disciplining them because they're afraid they might not like them. So I'll avoid that. I'll move away from that. Yeah. And I'm using disc as an example there, but more generally in life now, like, think about, so when I do things, why am I, what's motivating me to, what am I moving towards and what am I trying to move away from? Because away is actually, in many cases, it's not always a negative thing, but it's often avoidance, right? What am I avoiding and why? So what am I moving towards and what am I moving away from? And actually, if you're not moving towards anything, ask yourself, what's your bloody goals?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you've got a clear goal, but you're not getting there, are you taking the right actions to move towards it?
Yeah.
So towards or away, I think of it like that. And then inside all of this is where we started, interestingly, at the very beginning of the call. And you've used this word quite a few times, is daring to be curious, right? It's so important to dare to be curious about where you're at, what's possible, what's the other person saying, asking supplementary questions to really get underneath it. But interestingly, it's also about being brave enough to be curious, because often leaders don't do that, and they think they understand or they think they know, but they're not actually daring to be curious enough, and by doing so they get more back from their people. And it sounds really basic, but it's incredibly powerful, because you'll find out so much more.
No, I love that, and I think that is. I think there's three amazing advice there. What would one principle that you wish every leader understood?
Principle. What do you mean by principle? What? Just so we're making sure we're getting the definition of principle right.
Oh gosh, you can take that way you want. I guess it's just one thing that it could be. I'll take principle at one thing that you wish every leader understood.
Right. I think it comes back to a couple of things we've been talking about. When something happens, it's them being able to ask themselves, where does this moment, either what's happening in front of me or how I'm reacting to this thing, where does that live? Is that driven from my habits or is it my values?
Nice.
Yeah. And then see what answer you get back, and then dare to be curious with yourself as to, well, why is that? Why do I feel that way? What's that about? What if I was to, and then you can start doing the stuff I was saying earlier about, well, what if I did the opposite? And
I love that. So one of the, I mean, this whole I don't know what even time we're on now. We've surpassed that hour. My beeper went off a while ago, but it's been insight rich, this conversation. What actions would you encourage listeners to begin with? Because some people might go, flipping heck, there's a lot. Some might be familiar with this, some unfamiliar. Um, Early listeners, we've already know that we've gone global, woo woo, with this.
Very
So,
good. Nice.
so there's people all over the world listening. I guess the insights. So people are going to be from all different backgrounds. Just curious, then, how do we take these great insights into action? What would be your points to that?
Right. Well, I think this is where you in because we have covered a lot of ground and we've
We
kind of
have.
gone in lots of different directions. I guess we knew that was going to happen.
I
Bring it back.
love it. Yeah.
Bring it back to the gaps principle, right? Just start with first of all, am I clear on what I want? Okay, and then ask yourself, um, challenge yourself whether how much limitation you've put on that as well, on that goal, on what you think, because very often people just haven't got anything that's got enough stretch in it. It's kind of like if you said to me, I drive a Volvo, for example, and someone said, "Well, what car do you want?" Well, another Volvo. You already know how to get a Volvo. Like, why don't you want a Porsche? Well, actually, I don't like Porsches, but never mind. But I could. You see the point I'm
Yeah. Do.
making? We
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
it's so goal. Have you got a clear goal? Okay, and then look at action. And then if you haven't, get one, and make sure it means something to you, and that it floats your boat and energizes you when you think about it. If you do have one, then examine your behaviors. Okay, and ask yourself, what am I currently doing? And get a piece of paper, write down, put a line down the middle, and write down on one side all the things that you currently. Well, actually, no. There's a step before this. Write everything out and say this is what I'm currently doing. Okay, and then take another piece of paper and put a line down the middle, and then reread what you've just written and put it in two columns. Which one is taking me towards my goal, or and is productive? Which statements that I've written, and which ones aren't?
Love that.
And then you put the ones that aren't on the left, and then do something about them, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Stop, and it's kind of like stop, start, continue. Yeah. It's like, what do I need to stop doing? What should I
Yeah.
start doing, and what should I continue doing? Apply that logic to those things. Okay. So that's the action bit, and then persistence is for people that you've got to keep the goal at the forefront of your mind to keep you engaged. All right. And remember, and this is so important, and there'll be hundreds of different self-help books that tell you this and personal development books, but it's so true. You don't have to know how. You've just got to take the next step. The answer will unfold for you. All right. So, and the persistence bit is just about just don't give up. Just keep going. Keep going. And good days follow bad days.
Yeah. Nice. Where can people find you, follow you, check you out?
Well, they can go to my website, which is www.ajstirrup.com, or alternatively, they can look me up on LinkedIn. I will be sort of developing some other stuff throughout this year, hopefully doing some similar things to you, and getting some stuff out online more than I have done before.
Awesome.
So as and when, I'll do my best to publicise that. But yeah, in simple terms, that's probably the most straightforward way.
Perfect. And I would certainly suggest to all of the listeners that it'll all be in the show notes of this anyway. So all of the links and stuff to click on, I would certainly.
Right, thank you.
Follow Andrew. He does post quite a lot of really, really good content. And if he's going to post even more good content, then it's definitely worth making sure that you connect up with him, especially through LinkedIn. So what exciting things are you working on next? Then you said that you might be doing some new stuff. Any
Yeah,
exclusives?
exclusives. Yeah,
Woo!
well, it's kind of like, oh, hello, like sharing your goals on in public.
Yeah.
I've got a few concepts, which, if you like, are my own IP, I guess is the best way
Right.
of putting it.
Awesome.
Um, and I've always wanted to write a book.
Oh, cool.
And then, but also to package it in a way that it's meaningful for, for other people, in that sense. So that's something that I sat down a couple of weeks ago, beginning of the year and all that, and I've sort of said, right, okay, that's something I'm definitely going to be working on this year. That's probably the biggest, outside of other things that I've got going on. Yeah, and I'd also like to do more keynotes. I've done them in the past, but I would like to do more of those as well. So that's
Awesome.
probably where I'm at.
Fantastic. So before we completely wrap up, what we ask every guest to do is to offer one final challenge to the audience. So what final challenge will you set the listeners?
What final challenge will I set the listeners? Well, listeners, you got to take this absolutely as it's meant and properly as it's meant. Be honest with yourself,
I love that. Love that.
because unfortunately, very often we're not truly honest. So much of what we've been talking about today requires individuals to be really, really honest with themselves on the inside. And one of the best ways to do it is to stand in your bathroom, no one else around, look yourself in the eye in the mirror, and then go, can I be like that? Or have I done that? Or whatever. And if you find yourself sort of rationalizing it back to yourself and you're not being really honest, then you will probably be rationalizing, i.e., rationing lies to yourself. So be honest with yourself, because only by being honest can you make the changes you need to make.
Fantastic.
All right.
And absolutely brilliant. Appreciate it so much. Thanks ever so
Great to
much for
see
your
you.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone for listening.